Hello, I'm here with Andy Johnson, a pastor of Capitol Hill Baptist Church. My name is Alex Duke. I'm the editorial manager for Nine Marks. And today we're going to talk very briefly with Andy about his new book, Missions. Here it is. So first things first, Andy, could you give us a little bit of biography? So what's your experience with missions and training missionaries, and how did you get to the point where you wrote this book?
Yeah, I'm thankful. I grew up in a family and in churches where talking about missions was just normally part of what it meant to be a Christian. So I grew up with family members serving overseas. I graduated from high school early and went down and lived in the frontera, the area between Texas and Mexico, and worked with missionaries and church planting down there. And then with my time here at Capitol Hill Baptist Church, have spent a lot of time spending time overseas, but mainly trying to encourage our local church to think about how they support and encourage the work of missions and how some of them can be sent out as missionaries. But I've never lived for years and years overseas. I've been spending my time as a local church pastor trying to encourage the work that other people are doing overseas.
Hmm. And you haven't always been a vocational pastor. You had a previous career?
I did. I had two previous careers. I can't
Two
hold a
previous.
job. I can't hold down a job very well. So
Well,
I,
good luck
uh,
with this one.
I was a research scientist in Texas for a while, and I worked for the U.S. Congress doing science policy work. All the time I was an elder here at Capitol Hill Baptist Church and involved in stuff we were doing around the world.
Wonderful. So if you could, in 30 seconds or less, could you explain what you're trying to accomplish in this new book?
Yeah. So there's lots of books out there that talk about how you can be a missionary, what you should do as a missionary, how missionaries should go about the work of church planting. I I intended for this book to be for church members and for church leaders, pastors and other leaders in their church, to think about how they do the work of a local church in identifying who they're going to train, how they're going to train them, who they're going to support, how that local church is going to engage in missions. So that's what it's intending to accomplish and who it's aimed at.
Okay, so this is not a book about necessarily to the missionary already on the field about how to do missions, how to share the gospel with unreached, unengaged Muslims or whatnot. This is more to those of us here in the States or in the West who are seeking to think well about how to support missionaries and global work.
Yeah, and I've been amazed that there are lots of great books about missions in general. There are lots of great books directed to missionaries about how they can do the work they're going to do. I just wasn't aware of hardly any books that were aimed at local churches and at church members saying, okay, if you're going to stay where you live and be faithful in supporting missions, this is what it looks like.
Hmm.
So that's what I'm intending this for.
That's great. So the first two chapters of this book, you encourage the reader to have a right foundation for missions and to keep the first things first. So let me ask you, what is the right foundation for missions, and what are you referring to when you say we should keep first things first?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear in the Bible the foundation for missions is loving the gospel and loving what God's done in the gospel. And yeah, by first things first, I just mean that it's so easy for people when they think about missions to immediately let their minds go overseas and start thinking about, you know, missionary sacrifice, stories about, things that missionaries have done to try to motivate people with knowledge about other cultures. But I was just trying to tell people, first we need to love what God has done for us in the gospel. And then I think really God glorifying missions flows from our delight in what God's done for us. And then that motivates us in the work of missions. And frankly, I've observed people don't stay as missionaries very long if they're motivated by anything else. Like they joke in the military that no plan survives contact with the enemy. And in missions, no motivation survives contact with sinful, selfish people. If your motivation is just because you love sinners, that's a great thing. It's not going to be enough to keep you working in a difficult place for a decade.
Hmm.
You need to really love the gospel.
That's good. So at one point in the book, it's one of my favorite parts. You spend quite a bit of time on on one of the New Testament's more flyover books, a book we don't talk about very often, 3rd John. So what does 3rd John, one single chapter, have to teach us about missions?
Yeah, I've always been fascinated that people will pick other books of the New Testament, which I think are really helpful, in thinking about missions. But 3rd John and 2nd John, in kind of a negative way, are both written by the Apostle John to tell us who we should not support. That's what 2nd John tells us, and who we should support as missionaries. And that's what 3rd John tells us. So he writes to his friend Gaius, and he's basically commending his friend for faithfully supporting the work of missions. And so, yeah, I've always found 3rd John to be really helpful. If you're going to be somebody who's going to stay in a local church and you want, someone to be able to say that you are faithful in what you're doing for the brothers, which is what John writes for his friend Gaius, then 3rd John is a great book that just tells about what kind of missionaries we should support, why we should care about gospel work beyond our own churches, and what it looks like to support missionaries lavishly and to do it in a manner worthy of God. So highly commend it. It's better than my book.
Yeah, that's great. And did Capitol Hill do a sermon series on that, or was that just in your own reading, or kind of what was the genesis of some of those reflections?
Well, to be honest, in an appendix to one version of John Piper's book, Let the Nations Be Glad, one of the elders at Bethlehem Baptist wrote a very short piece on 3rd John, and that's when I first started grabbed onto it. And then I preached a sermon series here at CHBC on 3rd John, and yeah, that's where I got into it.
Awesome. Okay, so related to that, what should a church look for in a prospective missionary? And then related to that, what role should sending agencies like the IMB or others, what role should they play in the process?
Well, what should somebody look for in a missionary they're going to send? I tell a story in the book that's really true, that people from our church come pretty regularly to talk to me about missions and how they can prepare. And I'm sure in many ways I'm a disappointment to the members of our church, but particularly in this way, because
I don't know about that, Andy.
Oh, well, that's very charitable, but it's true. And they come and they're wanting me to tell them, ways they can prepare to be a missionary, books they should read, how to learn a language, all this stuff. And I usually just tell them, if you want to prepare to be a missionary, just be a really faithful and labor to be a fruitful member of this local church. Just be faithful and try to be fruitful. And people are always disappointed that they want something a lot more extraordinary than that. But I think that's the kind of people we should send as missionaries. Like, if there's a member of your church that you think it would really, in one sense, it would sort of wound the ministry of your church if they left and went out as a missionary, that's the person you should send as a missionary. Somebody who's embedded themselves in your local church and made themselves, someone who's discipling, sharing the gospel, showing hospitality. That's the kind of person you should send as a missionary. And I think sending agencies, when they're doing their jobs well, they look for people that churches commend in that way. Churches, people that the churches say, hey, this person is a fruitful, faithful member. They get to know people that aren't like them. Yeah, those are the kind of people they should be sending.
Yeah. So is there any traits in particular? So I appreciate that answer, and I think it's right. But is there any traits in particular that you would think would be especially useful for someone who does want to give their lives overseas, whether it's in a more Western missions environment, like an international church, or it's maybe on a frontier missions with unreached folks? Is there any specific character trait or specific facet of fruitfulness that you would highlight, or is it really just if you're faithful and fruitful here, it's pretty highly likely that you'll be faithful and fruitful overseas?
Yeah, well, they need to be willing. So if we can't compel people to go move to another culture if they don't want to, but if somebody's willing to do that, and maybe they even desire to do that, and they're good at getting to know people that aren't like them, they're intentional about evangelism, they are willing to inconvenience themselves to disciple other people, it could be that they're just going to totally implode in another culture, but that's not very likely. If somebody has those kind of traits and they want to invest in other people, there's other stuff, like maybe they're good with internationals or something, but generally just really faithful members who are good at getting to know people who aren't like them. If they want to, they could probably be really fruitful missionaries.
So it's not a very mystical version of calling that you're proposing here.
Not at all. And I think sometimes people will look at folks that love to travel and like have really thick passports, full of lots of different countries they visited, and they'll think, oh, that person would make a great missionary. But like really fruitful missionaries tend to be really boring people who go to one place, they stay there for a long time, they persevere in faithful gospel work, and those are the kind of people that tend to do well as missionaries.
So yeah, let's think for a minute about missionaries who are already on the field. How should churches and pastors in particular think through their support of those missionaries? Should they just kind of keep writing the checks and keep sending the prayer updates? Should they send short-term trips? What's kind of your general philosophy on supporting missionaries already on the field?
Yeah. Yeah, I think churches should be more aggressive about making sure the missionaries they support are really doing good work. And by good, I mean, like, are they doing excellent work? And are they doing biblically faithful work? I think sometimes it's really weird. Sometimes churches feel like if they're wrong to ask questions of people they support in missions, as if they're being, prying too much in wanting to ask questions about if these folks are being diligent in their work, what the shape of their theology is. So I think churches should probe the people they're going to support. And in one sense, I think churches should be ruthlessly selective in who they would give money and to people that are really faithful, and then once they trust those people, then those are the people they should lavishly support.
So lavishly support. I mean, what does that look like? I mean, I mean, without, every church has different budgets and different capabilities. We understand that, but what would you put under that banner of lavishly supporting? What should be the aspiration?
Well, I think our ultimate aspiration would be like when Paul writes about Zenos the lawyer and Apollos. He tells one of his proteges, he says, "See to it that they lack nothing." I think that's basically what our goal should be for missionaries. We should make sure they have everything they need to do the work that they're doing, that they shouldn't be having to scrimp. Now, lots of churches are not big enough to do that themselves, but as they partner with other people, I think that there's sometimes this idea that it's really godly for missionaries to be poor. I don't know where that got started, but it didn't come from the Bible. The Bible says they should be supported in a manner worthy of God, and that we should see to it that they lack nothing. So I think we should be carefully picking people that we trust and then trying to make sure that they have everything they need, both for their own support and to be able to do ministry in another place. So I encourage churches to think, rather than giving a little bit of money to like 50 different missionaries, just pick one or two that you have the most confidence in, and then give all your money to those people.
Yeah, yeah. So let's focus for a moment on short-term mission trips. So I remember as a senior in high school, I went on a 10-day trip to Kenya. I did it mainly because I needed volunteer hours to graduate from my high school. Though I wanted to do good work, I'm honestly not sure what some of the fruit from that was, or even on the front end, what some of the goals for us going were, apart from experiencing different parts of the world. So do you have concerns with short-term mission trips? And if so, are there any practical ways you think they could be improved?
Yeah, well, I'm sure you meant well on your trip. I kind of suspect you were probably way more trouble than you were worth to whatever poor missionary had to put up with you for 10 days. And that's not just because I know you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it is because I know you, but also just because, that's the way so many mission trips from North America are. They're more about, us sending people over to get this missions experience. And I'm not against short-term mission trips, but I suspect I'm against about 75% of short-term mission trips, because they're not intending to serve the missionaries. They're intending, for us to get an experience, for us to be able to see these things. A lot of times they're not even asking questions to know whether this is really going to be useful. I know lots of missionaries I talk to view short-term mission trips as sort of a necessary evil in order to maintain relationships with churches back in America. So I encourage pastors, when they invest in relationships with a missionary, to tell that person, we don't have to ever send a short-term trip, and we'll still love your work. We'll come visit you and see how you're doing, but you don't have to come up with projects. You don't have to arrange for hosting a dozen people on some trip. I think most of our short-term mission trips, well, a lot of the short-term mission trips from North America at least, would be better off not being sent. And I think instead we should just partner with people that we really trust, and then let them tell us if there's something they really need us to come do, and then it can be really useful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of statistics out on how much short-term mission trips have changed over the last 20, 30 years, from like 20,000 trips 30 years ago to well over 1 million people going on short-term trips
Oh,
in the
wow.
last few years. And yeah, I'm not convinced that most of that is probably really useful.
So if you could, I know CHBC at least will occasionally send church members to different areas. What kinds of things do they do on these short-term trips that have proven to be useful and beneficial to the missionaries there?
Yeah. Well, what we try to do is get to know folks really well, and then ask them what they want us to do.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the stuff they want us to do is not terribly exciting, like take care of their kids, help with some specific project, maybe build a website for them for their business, or sometimes there are things that are more interesting and more sort of frontline evangelism, but usually it's behind the scenes serving the missionaries who themselves know the language and can actually do gospel work in the culture. So, we've had members of our church fly halfway around the world to take care of other people's kids so that they can attend a meeting or do something that's significant. And it's not the most exciting work, but if your people really understand, okay, this is actually useful,
Yeah.
I think they'll be motivated by that, even if the experience itself isn't as exciting as some of the other things they might do.
Yeah, and can you explain at the very beginning of your answer to this question, you explained, like, of course pastors are going to be regularly visiting their missionaries to keep relationships warm. Is there a different way that we should conceive of those kinds of trips than what we would generally term short-term mission trips?
Yeah, I think a lot of times when you think about a short-term mission trip, you're thinking about a missionary on the field coming up with some project you can do, and then kind of doing all the logistics and arranging everything. It can be a ton of work, and often I don't think it's worth the effort they're having to put in. But I think it's great for leaders from a local church, if you're supporting a missionary, for the leaders to say, "Hey, we'd love to come out and just visit you and just see how you're doing."
Yeah.
Paul did that. He retraced where he had been with Barnabas, and they went to visit the churches that they had helped establish. And the scripture says they did it just to see how they were doing. I
Yeah.
think that's a fine motivation. So
Yeah.
in a trip like that, one or two elders from a church can say, "Hey, we'd love to come see you. You don't have to come up with a project for us to do. You don't have to have us preach at some church. We just want to show up. We just want to see how you're doing, pray with you, understand your work better. And you don't have to show us the sights. We just want to check on you spiritually and see how the work's going." I think those kind of trips are probably the most encouraging trips that a church can send to visit a missionary.
Yeah. It's just a pastoral visit, but really, really far away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let's think about assessing a missionary's fruit. So how should a church half a world away seek to assess the fruit that a missionary is doing? And could you conceive of it, being potentially wise to pull someone from the field for their lack of fruitfulness?
Yeah. Well, at the outset, it's important for us to know really well and trust the people that we're partnering with. Hopefully in our churches over time, the people that we're partnering with are members of our own church that we've sent out long-term to do gospel work. But if we're partnering with new people that we don't know very well, we're sort of getting to know them, then, I think most churches tend to err on the side of expecting immediate visible fruit. They hear stories from other places about rapid people movements coming to Christ, and they want to see really fast results, and so they expect that of their workers. Where I think what we should expect is faithfulness. And we need to know people well enough to know, are they actually making an effort to share the gospel? Are they faithfully communicating the gospel? Are they trying to train other leaders? Are they doing the sort of normal means of grace? And if they're doing that, and we're confident they're doing that faithfully, then we should persevere with people for a long time, even if there's not visible fruit.
Hmm.
At the same time, if we've got like 3 families all living in the same city from our church or that we're partnered with, and 2 of them, like everybody they talk to seems to become a Christian, and one family, nobody seems to ever want to have a second conversation with them about anything, well, that's a problem. So yes, theoretically, we might say some people just don't seem to be suited well to the work, but we don't want to base that on just looking at metrics and numbers. We want to base that on a relationship and maybe looking at their fruit relative to other people that we trust in the same place.
So when a missionary is home, or missionary's family is home for furlough, or a trip for something, and you have them come to church, the primary question that you're asking them isn't really numbers based. What kinds of things would you hope that a missionary would be able to share, say at a prayer service or a Sunday morning for churches that don't have a prayer service? Like what should we be looking for as a church member to feel confident in our support of a particular missionary?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of those things, you're not going to be able to assess those in one Sunday,
Yeah.
on a prayer service. For one thing, I think, really, if we're going to partner well with missionaries, we need to have them come be around our church for weeks or months so that we actually develop a relationship with them and we have confidence that they're the kind of people that we trust are going to faithfully be sharing the gospel. But I think we just want to look and see, hey, does this person have integrity? Do they seem to be working hard? Do they seem to clearly be communicating the real biblical gospel? But I think mainly we're just going to want to get to know people well enough so that we have confidence in them just based on who they are, their understanding of scripture, what they're doing.
Yeah. So last question, or last set of questions. A lot of what we've talked about here, in many ways, is aspirational. It's kind of nothing's going to be perfect, but it's the goal that in your estimation, churches should seek to meet. The reality is probably much different. So what advice would you give to the pastor who's maybe listening to this, and he senses that his church's mission strategy is kind of all out of whack? Maybe it's one of those where they support a mile wide and an inch deep. There's a bulletin board full of missionaries they support, but they don't really know any of them very well anymore. Or maybe it's a church with just no discernible mission strategy. How could a church improve that? What would you tell them to be the first step?
Well, the first step we talked about earlier on in our conversation. I mean, the first step is making sure that the motivation that's driving their members to think about missions is a genuine love for the gospel, that they really delight in and care about the gospel. So it may mean a pastor just preaching about the sort of missionary implication of the gospel more than he has been. And if he's doing that, then talking to some other churches they trust, in the area or that they know around the country, and asking them, like, who are people you're supporting? Trying to invest in a few people. If they've got 50 missionaries they're supporting and they don't know any of them, well, they should try to make an effort to assess their missionaries however they can,
Mm-hmm.
and narrow it down to 2 or 3 folks they really know they're going to invest in, and that they can get to know, and just start from that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, in getting practical for a moment, this is going to require changes in budget and things like that, which generally is going to require congregational involvement. So it's probably a long and patient process to move in that direction.
Yeah, I think the leaders of the church. If your church has elders, the elders should be the ones leading the missions effort. It's not wrong to have some kind of missions committee, but you don't want to communicate to your church that this is just sort of something. It's like the people that are interested in sports or that care about music or whatever, that this is just sort of an optional add-on to the Christian life. You want the people to understand this is sort of central to what it means to be a church. We're about the ministry of our church here, but we're about the spread of the gospel to places we're never going to be a part of just because we love the gospel. So you want to be leading that way as church leaders. So it's going to mean the church leaders taking initiative. And it's probably going to mean investing in just a few people that you really have confidence in, and then kind of working out from there.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Andy, thank you for your time. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for gently ribbing me. I appreciated it. And for those watching, the book is called Missions: How the Local Church Goes Global. It came out, I think, just a week ago. It's available, in all the regular places, Amazon, bookstores, etc. It's also available on the 9Marks bookstore. So if you go to 9marks.org, you click at the top bookstore, you'll be able to find it there. We hope that it will be an encouragement, and we hope that it will help churches think well about how their local church can go global. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Alex.